In just 29 seconds, one of Hollywood's biggest stars completely loses it on national television, tearing into Joy Behar, with words so sharp they cut through the studio like a knife, transforming a simple conversation into an absolute meltdown that ends with Samuel L. Jackson storming off the set in front of millions of viewers. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the moments celebrities want buried, and the truth behind the fake smiles you see on TV. Last night on The View, what started as a conversation about Samuel L. Jackson's latest project quickly spiraled into one of the most intense confrontations the show has ever seen. The tension was thick from the moment Jackson walked onto that stage, and by the end, the entire studio was left in shocked silence as one of the most respected actors in Hollywood walked out mid-show, refusing to take another second of disrespect. Samuel L. Jackson settled into his chair on The View's couch, the studio audience clapping enthusiastically as the panel of hosts smiled at him with those practiced television smiles. Joy Behar sat at the table, shuffling her notes and adjusting her glasses, while the other hosts welcomed the legendary actor with warm greetings and compliments about his latest work. Jackson wore his signature style, a dark tailored jacket over a black shirt, and his ever-present calm demeanor, though anyone who knew him well could sense something simmering beneath the surface. There was a tension in his shoulders, a guardedness in his eyes that wasn't usually there when he did press appearances. "Samuel, welcome back to The View," Joy said, her voice carrying that confident tone she uses when she thinks she's about to have a fun, easy conversation with a celebrity guest. "It's always great to have you here. We love having you on the show." "Thanks for having me," Jackson replied, his voice steady but not quite warm. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something in the way he sat, leaning back slightly, arms crossed loosely, that suggested he was already on guard. The conversation began normally enough, following the standard talk show script. They talked about his new film, a psychological thriller where he plays a veteran detective hunting down a serial killer who targets other law enforcement officers. Jackson spoke about the intense preparation he went through, the physical training required to look believable as an active detective, the psychological research he did by riding along with real detectives and studying criminal psychology. He discussed the moral complexities of his character, a man who has to confront his own demons while tracking down a killer who seems to know his every move. The other hosts asked questions about working with the director, about the grueling night shoots in the rain, about the physical demands of the action sequences at his age. Jackson answered each question thoughtfully, occasionally cracking a joke that made the audience laugh. He told a funny story about a stunt that went wrong, how he ended up covered in fake blood for 6 hours because they had to do multiple takes, and everyone seemed relaxed and entertained. For about 15 minutes, it was just another celebrity interview on a daytime talk show. But then Joy Behar decided to shift gears, and that's when everything started to unravel. "So Samuel," she said, leaning forward with that look she gets when she thinks she's about to make a clever point that will get applause from the audience, "I want to talk about something you said in an interview last month with Variety. You mentioned that Hollywood has a diversity problem, that there's still systemic racism in the industry. But isn't it true that actors like you have been incredibly successful? I mean, you're one of the highest-grossing actors of all time. You've been in more blockbuster movies than almost anyone. Doesn't that kind of contradict what you're saying?" Jackson's jaw tightened slightly. His eyes narrowed just a fraction, and those who knew his work could recognize that look. It was the same look he got in his movies, right before his character was about to explode. "That's not what I said, Joy. That's not what I said at all. I said Hollywood still has a long way to go in terms of representation behind the camera, in writing rooms, in directors' chairs, and in decision-making positions at studios. I was very specific about that. But that's kind of splitting hairs, isn't it?" Joy interrupted, waving her hand dismissively, as if brushing away his clarification. "I mean, you've made hundreds of millions of dollars in this industry. You're in the Marvel movies, you're in Star Wars, you're everywhere. You're on every screen in America. Doesn't that prove the system works? Doesn't that show that talent rises to the top, regardless of race?" The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them, sensing the tension building, tried to interject with a softer question, but Joy kept going, not picking up on the warning signs or choosing to ignore them. I'm just saying, when we have success stories like yours, maybe we should be celebrating that instead of always focusing on the negative, Joy continued, her voice taking on that lecturing tone that made Jackson's eyes narrow even further. Sometimes I feel like we get so caught up in being politically correct and finding problems everywhere that we can't acknowledge the real progress that's been made. And you're living proof of that progress, Samuel. Hold on, Jackson said, and there was an edge in his voice now, a sharpness that cut through Joy's words. You're telling me how I should feel about my own experience and my own community's experience? You're sitting there telling me, a black man who's been in this industry for 40 years, how I should interpret what I've seen and lived through. I'm not telling you how to feel, Joy said defensively, her voice rising slightly. I'm just offering a different perspective. Sometimes, I think we get so caught up in victimhood that we can't step back and see the bigger picture. I'm trying to provide some balance here. Balance? Jackson repeated, and there was something dangerous in how he said that word, drawing it out slowly. Joy, do you know how many black directors got to direct major studio films with budgets over $50 million last year? Do you know that number? I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, Joy started, already sounding defensive. Neither do I off the top of my head, but I can tell you it's not nearly enough. Jackson cut her off, his voice getting stronger. And that's the point. That's exactly the point I was making in that interview. Yeah, I've been successful. I've been very fortunate in my career. But I'm one person, one actor. That doesn't mean the doors are open for everyone. That doesn't mean the system is fixed. If anything, people like you point to people like me as proof that everything's fine, so we can stop talking about it and stop pushing for change. Joy laughed, actually laughed out loud, and that's when everyone watching could feel the temperature in the room change. It was a dismissive laugh, the kind that suggested she thought Jackson was being ridiculous, and it cut through the studio like a slap. Oh, come on, Samuel. You're being a little dramatic, don't you think? I mean, we just had a black president for 8 years. We have black CEOs, black billionaires, black people in every field at the highest levels. Things have changed significantly. Racism isn't what it used to be. Jackson stared at her for a long moment, and the silence was heavy and uncomfortable. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried across the entire studio with perfect clarity. Did you really just say that to me? Did those words really just come out of your mouth? The audience had gone completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen. The other hosts looked like they wanted to be anywhere else but in that studio. One of them had her hand over her mouth. Another was staring down at the table, unable to make eye contact with anyone. I'm just saying that maybe you're being too sensitive about this, Joy said. And there it was. The words that would blow everything up. The words that would turn this from an uncomfortable moment into an all-out confrontation. Not everything is about race. Sometimes things are just about individual success and failure. Jackson leaned forward in his seat, uncrossing his arms. His posture changed completely, from guarded to aggressive. Too sensitive? You're sitting here telling me, a black man who's been in this industry for decades, who's experienced more racism than you could ever imagine, that I'm too sensitive about racism and representation. You're really saying that to me right now? On national television? That's not what I said, Joy protested. But her voice had lost some of its confidence. She could sense she was losing control of the conversation, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. I'm saying that maybe you're looking for problems where they don't exist anymore. Maybe you're stuck in the past. That's exactly what you said. Jackson fired back immediately, his voice rising now. You just dressed it up in nicer words to make yourself feel better about saying it. You're doing that thing where white liberals want credit for acknowledging a problem exists, but the moment someone who actually lives with that problem every single day tries to explain it to you, tries to give you the real perspective from inside that experience, you get defensive and dismissive. You shut it down because it makes you uncomfortable. Joy's face was turning red now, her cheeks flushing with a combination of embarrassment and anger. I am not dismissive. I am one of the most progressive voices on television. I've been fighting for civil rights and equality since before you were probably born. I marched in the 60s. I've been an ally my entire life. Being progressive doesn't mean you can't be wrong, Jackson said, his voice rising to match hers. "It doesn't mean you get to shut down conversations when they make you uncomfortable. That's what you're doing right now, Joy. You asked me a question. I gave you an honest answer based on my lived experience, and you didn't like it. So now you're trying to make me the problem. You're trying to paint me as the angry black man who sees racism everywhere, and yourself as the reasonable voice of moderation. But what you're really doing is silencing me." "I am not making you the problem," Joy insisted, her voice getting louder to match his, the conversation devolving into something that resembled an argument more than an interview. "I'm trying to have a nuanced conversation here. I'm trying to bring some perspective that maybe you're too close to the situation to see." "Nuanced?" Jackson laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. It was a bitter, angry sound. "There's nothing nuanced about what you're doing. You're using my individual success to dismiss the struggles of an entire community. You're using the exception to prove the rule doesn't exist. That's not nuanced, Joy. That's a classic tactic to avoid dealing with uncomfortable truths. That's what people have been doing to black people for generations. They point to the one or two who made it and say, 'See? Everything's fine. Stop complaining.'" The word hung in the air like a bomb that had just gone off. The other hosts looked like they'd been frozen in place, their eyes wide, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. The studio audience was dead silent, completely silent. Some people with their hands over their mouths in shock at what they were witnessing unfold in real time. Joy's face went from red to nearly purple with rage. Her hands were shaking slightly as she gripped her note cards. "How dare you? How dare you sit there and lecture me like I'm some kind of ignorant person who doesn't understand these issues? I have been fighting for civil rights since before you were probably born. I've dedicated my career to speaking out against injustice. Then maybe it's time you started listening instead of talking." Jackson shot back immediately, not giving her an inch. "Because right now, you're doing exactly what white liberals have been doing for generations. You want to be seen as allies. You want the credit for being on the right side of history. You want the applause for saying the right things. But the moment a black person tells you something you don't want to hear, the moment we challenge you or make you uncomfortable, you get offended. You center your own feelings instead of the actual issues. That is not fair," Joy said. And now she was standing up, pointing her finger at Jackson like a teacher scolding a student. "That is completely unfair, and you know it. I have marched. I have protested. I have used my platform for decades to speak out against injustice and inequality. I've interviewed civil rights leaders. I've covered every major social justice movement. Don't you dare suggest I don't care about these issues." Jackson stood up too, and even though he wasn't yelling, even though his voice remained relatively controlled, his presence filled the entire studio. He had that commanding energy that made him such a powerful actor, and right now, it was directed entirely at Joy Behar. And I appreciate that, I do. I'm not saying you haven't done good things. But none of that means you understand what it's like to be black in America. None of that means you get to tell me I'm being too dramatic or too sensitive when I talk about my own damn experience. Your allyship doesn't give you the right to dismiss black voices when we're telling you something you don't want to hear. I never said you were being dramatic about being black, Joy argued, though her voice was shaking now and she looked flustered. I said you were being dramatic about Hollywood, about the state of the industry. That's completely different. Hollywood is part of America. Joy, Jackson said, his voice cutting through her words like a knife. Hollywood is a reflection of America. The same racism that exists in the streets exists in the boardrooms. The same bias that gets black men killed by cops is the same bias that keeps black directors from getting hired, that keeps black writers out of writers' rooms, that keeps black executives from the top positions at studios. It's all connected. It's all part of the same system. And if you can't see that, if you can't understand that, then maybe you're not as progressive as you think you are. The other hosts finally tried to step in more forcefully. One of them said something about taking a commercial break, about cooling down and coming back to this conversation. Another one tried to ask Jackson a softer question to change the subject. But Joy wasn't done. She was too angry, too defensive, too determined to win this argument. You know what your problem is? Joy said. And everyone in the studio seemed to hold their breath because they could sense something terrible was about to be said. You come on shows like this, And you want to lecture everyone about how oppressed you are, while you're sitting there wearing a $1,000 jacket and talking about your latest multi-million-dollar movie deal. You want to complain about the system while benefiting enormously from that same system. It's hypocritical, frankly. The studio gasped, audibly gasped. It was like someone had sucked all the air out of the room. The other hosts looked horrified. One of them actually said, "Joy, no." But it was too late. The words were out there, broadcast to millions of people watching at home. Jackson's expression went completely cold. His jaw was set, his eyes were hard, and when he spoke, his voice was ice. Wow, there it is. The real Joy Behar. You know what that's called, Joy? That's called respectability politics. That's you saying, I don't get to talk about racism because I have money now. As if racism only counts when you're poor. As if successful black people don't still face discrimination every single day. As if money makes you immune to prejudice. That's twisting my words, Joy said. But she sounded less certain now, less confident. She could tell she'd crossed the line but was too proud to back down. Is it? Jackson challenged, his voice rising again. Because it sounds to me like you're saying my opinion doesn't matter because I'm not struggling enough for your taste. Like there's some kind of poverty requirement before I'm allowed to call out injustice. Like I need to be a starving artist or an unemployed person before my experiences with racism are valid. That's what you just said to me, Joy. You're putting words in my mouth, Joy said, her voice rising again in frustration. I'm repeating what you just said to me, Jackson countered. You literally just brought up my jacket and my career to dismiss what I was saying about representation in Hollywood. You used my success against me. Do you not see how messed up that is? Do you not understand what you just did? Joy threw her hands up in the air in exasperation. I can't say anything right here. Every word I say, you twist into some accusation of racism. I can't have a conversation with you because you've already decided I'm the enemy. Maybe because what you're saying is coming from a racist place, Jackson said flatly. And the studio erupted again. The audience made that shocked, uncomfortable noise that happens when someone says something that can't be taken back. The other hosts were talking over each other now, some trying to defend Joy, others trying to calm Jackson down. Everyone trying to salvage what had become a complete disaster of an interview. How dare you, Joy said, her voice shaking with anger and what might have been hurt. How dare you call me racist? I have spent my entire career, my entire adult life, fighting against racism. I've dedicated myself to equality and justice. And you have the nerve to sit there and call me racist? That's outrageous. That's offensive. And yet here you are, doing it, Jackson said, his voice eerily calm now, which somehow made his words hit even harder. You don't have to burn a cross to be racist, Joy. You don't have to use slurs. Sometimes racism looks like dismissing black voices when they tell you something you don't want to hear. Sometimes it looks like tone policing. Sometimes it looks like using someone's success against them to invalidate their experiences. Sometimes it looks exactly like what you've been doing for the last 15 minutes. Get out, Joy said suddenly, her voice sharp and commanding. She pointed toward the exit with a shaking hand. If you're going to sit here and attack me like this, if you're going to insult me on my own show, then get the hell out of here. I'm not going to tolerate this kind of disrespect. Attack you? Jackson repeated, and he actually laughed in disbelief. You asked me a loaded question designed to dismiss my concerns. You laughed at me when I tried to explain the reality of racism in Hollywood. You told me I was being too sensitive. You brought up my wealth to undermine my credibility. You used every trick in the book to shut me down. And I'm attacking you? That's rich, Joy. That's really rich. I asked you to leave, Joy said, her voice cold now, trying to regain some authority. This is my show, and I'm telling you to leave. Oh, I'm leaving, Jackson said, already reaching for his microphone pack and starting to unclip it from his belt. Trust me, I'm leaving, but not because you told me to. I'm leaving because this is exactly why these conversations never go anywhere. People like you don't actually want to hear from people like me. You want us to smile, be charming, tell funny stories about making movies, and stay in our lane. The moment we talk about something real, something that matters, something that makes you uncomfortable, you shut it down. You either dismiss it, or you get defensive, or you kick us out. He tossed his microphone onto the couch with more force than necessary and started walking toward the exit. The cameras followed him, capturing every step, every movement. The audience was completely silent, watching this unfold like they were witnessing a car crash in slow motion. "And for the record," Jackson said, turning back to face Joy one last time before he reached the door, "I came on this show in good faith because I thought we could have a real conversation. I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd actually listen to what I had to say instead of waiting for your turn to talk. But you proved exactly what I've been saying all along. You want to be seen as an ally, but you don't want to do the actual work. You don't want to sit in the discomfort of being called out. You don't want to examine your own biases. You just want the credit without the effort. You're being completely unfair," Joy called after him. But her voice was weaker now, lacking conviction. "I've done nothing but try to have a respectful conversation." "No, Joy," Jackson said, his hand on the door handle now. "What's unfair is you using your platform to silence voices instead of amplifying them. What's unfair is you making this about your feelings instead of the actual issues we should be discussing. What's unfair is you inviting me here just to disrespect me on national television. That's what's unfair." "I didn't disrespect you," Joy insisted. But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. Her anger was giving way to something else. Maybe embarrassment. Maybe the first hint of realization. "Yeah, you did," Jackson said simply, matter-of-factly. "And the really messed up part is, you don't even realize it. You genuinely think you were being reasonable. That's the problem with people like you, Joy. You're so used to being right, so used to being on the good side, so used to being applauded for your progressive views, that you can't even recognize when you're wrong. You can't even see when you're doing harm. Well, I'm not going to sit here and let you talk down to me. I'm not going to smile and nod while you invalidate my experiences and my community's struggles. I have too much respect for myself to do that." One of the other hosts, trying desperately to salvage something from this disaster, made one last attempt. "Samuel, please, let's all just take a breath and start over. We can—" "No," Jackson cut her off, but his voice was gentle when he spoke to her, acknowledging that she wasn't the problem. "I appreciate you trying, I really do. But this is over." Joy made it crystal clear how she really feels. "And I'm not interested in continuing this conversation. There's no point." He looked back at Joy one final time, his expression a mixture of disappointment and resignation. "You know what's crazy? I actually used to respect you. I used to think you were someone who got it, who understood the fight, who was really about what she claimed to be about. But you're just like all the rest. You want diversity as long as it looks good on camera. You want black voices as long as they're saying what you want to hear. You want progress as long as you don't have to actually change anything about yourself. Well, I'm done playing that game. I'm too old and I've been through too much to play along anymore." "You're being incredibly unprofessional," Joy said, trying one more time to regain the moral high ground, to make this about Jackson's behavior instead of her own words. "Walking out of an interview like this is childish." Jackson just shook his head slowly, a sad smile on his face. "No, Joy. What's unprofessional is ambushing a guest with bad faith questions and then getting mad when they don't play along. What's unprofessional is using your position as host to bully someone into backing down from their lived experiences. What's unprofessional is calling someone hypocritical for having money while talking about racism. What's unprofessional is everything you've been doing this entire time. But you can't see that because in your mind, you're the victim here. I'm the angry black man who couldn't handle a simple conversation. That's the story you'll tell yourself to avoid looking in the mirror." He pulled open the door that led backstage, the one that guests used to exit the studio. The camera was still on him, capturing his final words before he left. And millions of people at home were watching every second of this historic television moment. "I came here to promote my movie, maybe have some laughs, discuss some real issues if the opportunity came up," Jackson said, his voice tired now, exhausted from the effort of explaining something that should be obvious. "Instead, I got a masterclass in performative allyship and white fragility. I got a front row seat to exactly what's wrong with liberal media. So, thanks for that, Joy. Thanks for proving that even the so-called progressives would rather protect their own egos than actually listen to black people. Thanks for showing everyone watching that having the right politics doesn't mean you can't be part of the problem. Don't you dare! Joy started, her voice rising in anger one more time. But Jackson was already walking through the door. I'm done here, he called back without turning around. Good luck with the rest of your show. I'm sure you'll find a way to make yourself the victim in all this. And with that, Samuel L. Jackson walked out of the View's studio, the door closing firmly behind him. The sound of it shutting echoed through the studio, final and definitive. The cameras didn't know where to point. They swung back to the host's table where Joy Behar stood, her face a complex mixture of anger, embarrassment, defensiveness, and perhaps the first flicker of realization that maybe, just maybe, she had been completely and utterly wrong. The other hosts sat frozen, some looking down at the table, others exchanging glances that clearly communicated their discomfort with what had just happened. One of the producers could be heard off camera urgently saying they needed to go to commercial immediately, but not before the cameras caught a few more seconds of the aftermath. Joy slowly sat back down, her hands still shaking slightly. The audience remained silent, no one knowing whether to applaud, boo, or just sit there in shock. The energy in the studio was heavy, uncomfortable, the kind of tension that makes everyone want to leave. But it was too late. The damage was done. The words couldn't be taken back. Samuel L. Jackson had said what he needed to say, had defended himself against dismissal and disrespect, and had walked out with his head held high, refusing to be diminished on national television, regardless of who was trying to do the diminishing. He had drawn a line and refused to cross it, even when that meant walking away from one of the biggest daytime talk shows on television. The studio door through which he'd exited remained closed, a physical barrier that represented so much more than just the end of an interview. It represented the breaking point, the moment when someone who had been asked to explain their pain one too many times finally said enough. It represented the frustration of having to educate people who should already know better. It represented the exhaustion of being told, "You're too sensitive about your own oppression," by people who have never experienced it. As the show cut to commercial, the last image viewers saw was that closed door, and Joy Behar's face, still processing what had just happened, still trying to figure out how an interview had gone so spectacularly wrong. And in homes across America, millions of viewers sat in their own silence, having witnessed one of the most raw, unfiltered, and uncomfortable moments in daytime television history.